Veterans Day, remembering all who served. Who is a veteran? Veterans are men and women who are currently serving or have served in our armed forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, in times of war or peace. Veterans Day is not about politics. It's about truth, honor, and freedom. Using a line from James Otto's song, Soldiers and Jesus, don't hand me a party's political views. There's a left side, right side, and then there's the truth. See, Veterans Day is about the truth. Each day we begin first period with a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. We pledge our allegiance every day. So we need to take a moment and thank a veteran for giving us a flag and a country to pledge allegiance to. Veterans Day used to be known as Armistice Day. It was originally set aside to commemorate the end of what was known as the Great War, or the War to End Wars, or World War I as we commonly know it now. It was on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918 when 4 years of brutal, bloody, horrific conflict came to an end and the warring factions signed an agreement or an armistice. On June 1st, 1954, President Eisenhower signed a law that changed November the 11th from Armistice Day to Veterans Day, a day that would honor all veterans. Veterans Day is now observed on November 11th, regardless of what day of the week on which it falls. We know that some holidays are moved to the closest weekend, not this one. It serves as a time to celebrate America's veterans for their patriotism, love of country, and willingness to serve and sacrifice for the common good. Everybody in here is at war every day. We just don't know it sometimes. See, we choose whether to fight battles or to let things slide because the end justifies the means. Everyone has a place in winning a war, no matter the enemy. Let's focus for a moment on a war in which we actively participate in creating winning warriors. See, in the 1300s at Cambridge University in England, a chapel was constructed for one of the colleges. The vaulted roof supported huge beams fashioned out of old-growth oak. 700 years later, the beams had deteriorated to the point that the roof was in danger of collapsing. The building required extensive renovation, including replacing the beams. But where in that time could those repairing the building find giant oak trees of such an age and quality as had been available to the original builders? The answer lay right outside the door of the chapel. See, the original builders of the chapel had known that at some point far in the future, the structure was going to need new oak beams, so they planted acorns in the churchyard. And over the centuries, a grove of oak trees had grown to full maturity. See, the mission of those chapel builders was to ensure the survival of the chapel, and that extended hundreds of years into the future. Their vision, planting the acorns as a means of achieving the mission, was a step-by-step process that required planning and organization. Their mission and their vision were built upon their values, a solid foundation that gave direction and meaning to those things that they set out to achieve. You are the acorns of today's society. You are the foundation of the forest of tomorrow. We, your teachers, parents, coaches, sponsors, bosses, and other forward-thinking adults are doing our best to enable you to go from acorns into the giant world-leading oak trees that will grab hold of the world and take it into the future. You have the choice to become a mighty oak in today's society's forest or not to, but the choice is yours. You make that decision. In 2009, the president said, "Where you are right now doesn't have to determine where you'll end up. No one's written your destiny for you." See, here in America, you write your own destiny. You make your own future. Question is, do you know why you have the choice to make your own future? You have choices because you have freedom, and you have freedom because of the duty, service, and the sacrifice of past and present veterans. Father Dennis Edward O'Brien wrote about those who are responsible for these freedoms. It is the soldier, not the reporter, who's given us freedom of press. It's the soldier, not the poet, who's given us freedom of speech. It's the soldier, not the campus organizer and the protester, who gives us the freedom to demonstrate. It's the soldier who salutes the flag, who serves beneath the flag, and whose casket is draped by the flag, and who provides the freedom and allows the protester to burn the flag. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are truly free thanks to our veterans. Before 9/11 and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, wars were most often thought of a thing of the past. It's been about 30 years since the first Gulf War. Most everyone in this room knows someone who's served our country in the last 20 or 30 years. We all know wars and battles are not a thing of the past. Here's a few excerpts from the last 10 or 15 years of war. This was retrieved from the Associated Press out of Mosul, Iraq. It's not a pretty sight. Sagging skeletons of 2- and 3-story buildings under a threatening gray sky. Abandoned shops with corrugated iron fronts riddled by bullet holes. And amid the garbage heaps and pools of fetid rainwater, a roadside bomb is set to explode. The following excerpts are from Dakota Meyer and Bing West's book, Into the Fire, from the war in Afghanistan. The fields around us were littered with bodies of Afghan soldiers, some tucked up against the terrace walls and others lying behind little rocks or in shallow depressions. For maybe 2 or 3 seconds, I didn't get it. It was surreal. All those bodies were lying there. I couldn't be looking at corpses. They couldn't all be dead. Strange though it may seem, I wasn't scared or angry. I was beyond that. I didn't think I was going to die. I knew I was dead. There wasn't anything I could do about it. I wasn't a thinking human being. I'd gone somewhere else. I wasn't firing the machine gun. I was the machine gun. Rod, my driver, he wasn't just driving the truck. He'd become the truck. I had melded with my weapon. Rod had melded with the truck. I was no more human than the 5-foot machine gun I was embracing. We were locked together, metal and flesh. I climbed down from the turret and ran over to the askar, the Afghan soldiers we were advising and fighting alongside. He'd taken a bullet in the thigh and was slowly bleeding out. I kept a stack of tourniquets in my med pack and knew how to apply them. I wrapped a tourniquet around his thigh, I twisted it extra tight, and he screamed. I said to the interpreter, "Tell him to shut up. Hurting is better than dying." See, these are the things that we don't, in the United States, have to deal with. But there are still, to this day, in 2020, men, women, boys, and girls around the world that are dealing with this horror on a daily basis.
I was working at a bowling alley. I ran the restaurant at a bowling alley, and we had a television, and there came a very short clip of the president putting the Medal of Honor on Roger Donlon. And he just, standing so tall and so straight. And now, because of the military people in my family, I was very aware of what the Medal of Honor was. And I thought, wow, when I grow up, I'd like to be a soldier like him.
In 1965, after finishing high school, Sammy Davis enlisted in the Army. His father had been an artilleryman during World War II, and he volunteered to do the same. Upon the completion of training, he requested to be sent to Vietnam.
Our job was to provide close and continuous support to the infantry. That's the artilleryman's job. So we would sometimes have to fire almost continuously for 8 or 10 hours. As long as the enemy was attacking our infantrymen, you had to do your job. And then you may lay around for a day or 2 days and not do much. Then you cleaned everything and painted everything and polished your bullets. Sergeant James Gant from Lansing, Michigan, he was the meanest sergeant I've ever seen in my life, and he would make us take each bullet out of our clip every night before it got dark and polish it. He was just a bitter old man. Sergeant Gant was 27 years old. You know, he was just a bitter old sergeant, and that's why he was picking on us.
On November 18, 1967, Davis's unit was airlifted to a tiny island in the Mekong Delta near Kai Lay, Vietnam. American infantrymen were already heavily engaged in the area when Davis and his fellow gunners arrived.
So we landed at 8 o'clock in the morning. As soon as we spread the trails on the 105 howitzer, we started firing. And we fired the weapon all day. Just before dark, the enemy broke contact, so therefore we were able to quit firing. And a helicopter, one of our helicopters, came in and sat down, and a major got out. And he said, your probability of getting hit tonight is 100%. So prepare yourselves. He got back in his helicopter and away he went. At 2 o'clock exactly, and I remember because I looked at my watch, we heard mortars sliding down the tube, which is a very distinctive sound, and to hear them sliding down the tube, you got to be pretty close. And I said immediately, I said, well, when did we move in mortars? And Hart said, we didn't. The mortars were just raining down. And at 2:30 exactly, the mortars quit. It was this eerie quiet. We looked at each other and we heard whistles being blown like a coach has, and orders being shouted in English. And basically what they were saying was, go kill the GI. Sergeant Gant said, okay boys, this is it. So we grabbed a beehive round, set it on muzzle action, loaded it in the tube, and we were standing there at our position ready for him. I was waiting for Sergeant Gant to tell me to fire. Now, I knew not to fire until he said fire no matter what was happening, and I could see the enemy all around us. They were doing mass assault waves. Then he said fire, and I pulled the lanyard. Well, the weapon went off, did its job, but the enemy had set up a rocket right across the river from me. And when I fired, they fired at my muzzle blast. When it hit the shield, it blew me off the piece. It also hit Sergeant Gant right in the chest. And the last thing I can remember was Sergeant Gant just disappearing into the darkness. Well, the enemy started turning my howitzer around, supposedly to turn it and fire at our guys. If I'd been awake, I would have known that our next gun back was going to fire a beehive round. Standing rule is you never let the enemy take control of the weapon. You know, common sense. But I was not, I was unconscious. So when the enemy started picking my howitzer up to fire it, Bill Few from Rising Sun, Ohio, fired the beehive. A beehive round effectively turns the 105 howitzer into a shotgun. It fires 18,000 little darts, beehive darts. From mid-thigh up to and including my fourth lumbar vertebra, I had about 30 beehive holes that just passed through me. I had a flak jacket on, which is the only thing that saved my back. When they fired the beehive at me, it woke me up, and I rolled over and I rolled face up in the bottom of my foxhole, and I'm looking up and I could see all these pretty lights going right over the top of my foxhole, and I thought, wow, it's just like Christmas. My hearing went like turning the stereo from 0 to 50. You know, went from hearing nothing within just a very short period of time. It got loud enough that the smoke started clearing out of my head, and I'm starting to realize what's happening, and those weren't just pretty lights, they were tracers. So I kind of raised up on one elbow, and I looked down, and there was 150 to 200 enemy right there. Well, I picked up my M16. I had 12 clips, which is roughly about 180 rounds. And I started doing my job as a soldier. It was just like living in a bad dream. You know, no matter what I did, it's like I wasn't doing nothing to them. It was a reinforced battalion. It was 1,500 against 42 kids. And they just kept coming. Well, I fired the last rounds, and I didn't think that I was probably going to see daylight, but I wasn't going to quit. You know, because I thought, well, if I don't do my job, those guys behind me ain't got a chance. So I thought, well, I'll see if I can get off one round from the howitzer. So I scrounged around, found a beehive round, set it on muzzle action, found the canister that had not been fired, had to find the powder because we'd had everything set up nice and orderly, and naturally the mortars had blown everything askew. Now the enemy's still doing their job. I mean, they're everywhere. So I was having to hide and lay in the water, and they'd run over me. And finally, when I found all the components and I loaded the piece, I pulled the lanyard. The gun didn't go off. It went, when I pulled the lanyard, it went pop, and my heart just sunk, you know, because this was my last effort. But I could feel the gun kind of going. And then it went off, and it went boom. I had overcharged it. Figured I was only going to get one round. I wanted it to be maximally effective, so I filled the canister full of loose powder. Later they told me, says, yeah, man, we thought that you had rigged up some kind of big flamethrower or something because of all that wet powder. That's why it didn't go off immediately. Well, I was still alive. I thought, well, maybe I can get off one more round. Well, I one more rounded it until I had heard someone across the river shouting, "Don't shoot, I'm a GI." And I seen Gwendell Holloway, my brother, standing up waving these boonie hats saying, "Don't shoot, I'm a GI." And I said, my God, somebody's got to go get him. By this point, my body was in real feeble condition, and I knew I couldn't just run down there and swim across the river. So I thought, well, I'll find an air mattress. That's what the Army had given us to sleep on. So I crawled down to the river, swam across the river, stashed the air mattress in the bushes, and started making back to where I'd last seen Gwendell standing. There was a foxhole there. And instead of just one man being in it, there were 3 men in it. Well, I knew I didn't have the strength to make 3 trips. It had taken me about 45 minutes to make that trip over to that point. And I was just getting so tired. So I asked the man above to give me the strength to carry all 3 of my brothers at one time.
Despite his massive injuries and the unremitting ferocity of the Viet Cong attack, Davis made 2 agonizing trips across the river, shuttling his wounded companions to relative safety.
They pulled Jim up on the bank and started doing what they could for him, and I started crawling back to help Bill Few's guys when I came across my Mino Sergeant Gant. About half his body was in water, had this big hole in his chest, and he couldn't talk, but he'd picked his hand up. And I thought, my sergeant wants me to hold his hand. So I kind of crawled up and I grabbed a hold, and I still was hoping that he was going to tell me what to do next, you know. And I grabbed a hold of his hand and I looked down in his eyes. The light bulb that comes on in your head that your daddy always told you about, the light bulb came on. All these things that he had, you know, polishing the bullet, the beehive round, setting the time fuse on it, setting out in 100-degree heat with a blindfold. Sergeant Gant shared with us the things that he knew was going to help us survive. And when I looked down in his eyes, I knew that he didn't hate me, that he loved me. You got to love somebody a whole lot to pick on them and teach them things. Jim Deister was one of the last people that we loaded on the helicopters. He was with our dead. The medic in the helicopter seen a bubble come up through the chest wound that Jim had in his chest. He'd been shot in the chest also. And took his stethoscope off and put it on his heart and had a heartbeat. And Jim Deister is alive and well today, living in Salina, Kansas. I got to hold Jim Deister's grandbabies. What an awesome feeling. Knowing that if I hadn't done my job when I was just a kid, that this precious little thing would not be here. There were 11 of us left standing that morning out of the 42 that started, 12 counting me. The other 11 men are the men that put me in for this. I didn't do anything heroic. I did my job. That's what soldiers do. And if there was one of these given that night, there should be at least 42 of them. Because if any one of us had not done their job, there would be none of us alive. It sounds silly, perhaps, to say that I went to war and found out about love. What real love is? You know, I didn't go to war to kill people. I went to war because I loved my daddy. I wanted him to be proud of me. I went to war because I loved my grandpas and I loved my country. And when I got over there, the reason why we fought so hard was because we discovered we loved each other, that we were all we had. And they became brothers. We became brothers. And that's lasted up, you know, it's been 36 years, and those men that I fought with are still my brothers. So I learned about what real love is.
The following song, Stand by Mike Corrado, is about Medal of Honor recipient Kyle Carpenter. Lance Corporal Carpenter and a fellow Marine were manning a rooftop security position on the perimeter of Patrol Base Dakota in Afghanistan when the enemy initiated a daylight attack with hand grenades, one of which landed inside their sandbagged position. Without hesitation and with complete disregard for his own safety, Lance Corporal Carpenter moved toward the grenade in an attempt to shield his fellow Marine from the deadly blast. When the grenade detonated, his body absorbed the brunt of the blast, severely wounding him, but saving the life of his fellow Marine. By his undaunted courage, bold fighting spirit, and unwavering devotion to duty in the face of almost certain death, Lance Corporal Carpenter reflected great upon himself and upheld the highest traditions of the Marine Corps.
Some signed up first chance they could, 17. They had their mama sign them papers so they could leave. And on the bus ride out of town, the families gather round and wave as they leave. And they come from the shores of Carolina, through the plains to the hills of California, with a hunger deep inside and a burning desire to be free. And they stand upon that wall, and they stand up for our soul, and they stand for the ones who've gone before. They stand. Everyone wants to be the hero, but some don't want to pay that price. You think living free comes easy, just ask those who sacrificed. As they stand for the chance to believe, oh, stand so you can be anything you wanna be. Oh, they stand so our children can be free. They a time to fight and a time to fold it and give it in are words they've never known. And so they stand up on a wall, and they stand up for us soul, and they stand for the ones who've gone before. They stand. And we stand for the chance to believe. Oh, stand so you can be anything you wanna be. Oh, we stand so our children can be free. Oh, we stand. We say prayers for those no longer with us, and the families that stand behind those who protect us. And on the bus riding back to town, everyone gathers round for those who stand.
Tonight, CBS News correspondent David Martin on assignment for 60 Minutes.
I have never seen the like. That's what a helicopter pilot who had watched a 21-year-old Marine stave off a Taliban ambush that threatened to overrun his unit told us. The Marine was Dakota Meyer, a Kentucky farm boy who just this past Thursday received the nation's highest military award, the Medal of Honor, from President Obama at the White House. Meyer was on a mission in the Ganjgal Valley of Afghanistan, where he repeatedly ran a gauntlet of enemy fire in a desperate effort to save his fellow Marines. Dakota Meyer will tell that story tonight, but there is much more to it than his almost insane bravery. This was an operation which went terribly wrong, so wrong that 2 Army officers were issued career-ending letters of reprimand. It's a story as old as combat. When a warrior's leaders let him down, he has nothing to fall back on but his own courage. Dakota Meyer will tell you he was just doing his job. But when you see and hear what he did, you too may say, I have never seen the like.
Dakota Meyer grew up shooting game on this farm in Greensburg, Kentucky, and can hit a squirrel at 750 yards. But it wasn't his marksmanship that earned him the Medal of Honor. It was his astonishing courage.
Did you think you were going to die?
I didn't think I was going to die. I knew I was.
You knew you were going to die?
I knew I was going to die.
The battle took place in this remote valley deep in enemy territory in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Meyer ran a gauntlet of fire not once but 5 times, with insurgents shooting down on him from 3 sides.
So why are you going in there?
There was U.S. troops getting shot at, and those are your brothers.
4 Marines were trapped in the village of Ganjgal after a patrol of 9 Americans, both Marines and Army soldiers, and 45 Afghan military was ambushed. Afterwards, the Army Center for Lessons Learned produced this animated recreation of what happened. The patrol set out for what was supposed to be a friendly meeting with village elders. Rocky terrain forced them to get out of their armored vehicles and move in on foot.
They're walking up toward the village. What happens next?
Right at daylight, they open fire on them. The enemy starts raining down. They had mortars, rockets, rocket-propelled grenades, and small arms fire.
They were waiting for you.
They were.
This was an ambush.
Oh, it was. We were set up.
With an estimated 100 to 150 enemy fighters dug in on the high ground above them, the Marines called for artillery fire from a nearby base. The first rounds missed, so First Lieutenant Michael Johnson, one of the 4 Marines trapped inside the village, radioed new coordinates of the enemy positions. But the commanders in the operations center back at the base refused to fire.
They denied it. The Army denied it and told him it was too close to the village. And he said, too close to the village. And the last words I heard him say was, if you don't give me these rounds right now, I'm going to die.
Did he get the artillery fire?
No, he didn't. The response was basically, try your best.
An investigation conducted after the battle determined that 2 Army officers making those decisions in the operations center that day were clearly negligent. The actions of key leaders in the command center, the report said, were inadequate and ineffective, contributing directly to the loss of life which ensued. Because of what the report calls poor performance and an atmosphere of complacency, the Operations Center just did not realize how bad the situation was until it was too late.
You can't sugarcoat it.
Now retired, Colonel Richard Hooker conducted that investigation.
The 2 principal officers that were named in the investigation failed to discharge their duties in a responsible way, in a way that the Army and the country has a right to expect them to behave.
Among the findings, 2 Kiowa helicopters armed with rockets and machine guns were minutes away from Ganjgal, but never made it into the battle.
They were on another mission, but they were close at hand.
How far away in terms of minutes?
I would estimate 5 to 10 minutes flying time.
Those helicopters actually broke away from that other mission and headed toward Ganjgal, but were recalled because the request had not gone through proper channels. The troops under fire didn't know that. They were told the helicopters would be there in 15 minutes.
Up to this point, it's been 15 minutes and no air support yet. So they requested again, and they said 15 more minutes.
So 15, now you're at 30 minutes on air.
At 30 minutes, and I'm hearing the radio traffic, and now it's starting to get worse. Gunny Kennefic, I believe it was, come across the radio and said, "I can't shoot back because I'm pinned down. They're shooting at me from the house, and it's so close."
Gunnery Sergeant Aaron Kennefic was one of the 4 trapped Marines.
It's 15 minutes are starting to add up.
They are, yeah. We're at almost 45 minutes and no air support. I believe that the enemy started seeing, well, they're not getting what they need. Let's take advantage of this opportunity.
Dakota Meyer, one of the youngest, lowest-ranking Marines on the battlefield, took charge.
We had to do something, and we requested to bring a truck in. We were told no. All your guys are in there getting lit up, and you want to be in there helping them. And we waited about 5 minutes maybe, and we requested again. We were told no. So we requested again about 2 minutes later, and we were told no again. So I looked at Staff Sergeant Rodriguez Chavez and I said, "We're going in."
Staff Sergeant Juan Rodriguez Chavez, who had received the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest honor, drove an armored truck toward the village, while Meyer manned the gun turret.
It felt like the whole valley turned on this truck.
You were it.
It was like, we're it. Like, here comes the big target. The enemy was they were just running right at you, at the truck.
So this is not just raining fire down. Now they're trying to swarm the truck?
It's just like a killing fest for them, I think.
How close were rounds coming to you when you were doing this?
The rounds were hitting the turret, and I just kept moving back left and right, left and right. There was so much fire, it sounded like static over top of your head. I was just waiting for one of those rounds to hit me in the face.
How close is the enemy getting to you?
15, 20 meters.
Close.
Yep.
As depicted in the Army animation, dead and wounded Afghan soldiers who had been part of the patrol lay scattered along the valley floor.
I would run and try to assist as many Afghans as I could.
So you get out of the truck?
I'm out of the truck on foot.
So you're out in the open in the killing zone?
I am.
Meyer and Rodriguez Chavez would drive the dead and wounded out of the valley and come back to run the gauntlet of fire again and again, still trying to get to the 4 Marines trapped in the village.
You either get them out alive or you die trying. If you didn't die trying, you didn't try hard enough.
When the Marines' radios fell silent, Army Captain Will Swenson, who was pinned down just outside the village, took up the call for fire.
Captain Swenson probably made 9 or 10 different calls for fire before he probably gave up in frustration.
Does he say, "Look, I'm not kidding, I really need this fire"?
Yeah, the evidence says he was very, very insistent in his calls for help. No question about that.
How long after the battle begins do the first helicopters show up?
It was probably an hour and 45 minutes before the first helicopters come on station.
Helicopters were finally overhead as Dakota Meyer tried to blast his way through the valley to the stranded Marines.
We interviewed a number of pilots who were there that day, and several of them stopped in mid-sentence, unable to finish their description of Meyer's actions that day. They just didn't have the words to describe it.
When the helicopters showed up, did that put an end to the ambush?
No, it didn't solve the problem, but it certainly was a great help to the soldiers and Marines and Afghans that were fighting on the ground, enabled them to move about the battlefield a little better.
With Marine Lieutenant Adamola Fabayo, who would also receive the Navy Cross, Manning the machine gun, Swenson and Meyer drove deeper into the valley.
Me and Captain Swenson kept driving this unarmored truck to this valley, and rounds are going everywhere through it.
They're going through?
Like, you got both windows down. You could hear them coming, whizzing through.
A helicopter finally spotted the 4 Marines, but there was too much gunfire to land.
Well, they started to try to land, and they couldn't. They were going to get shot down. So I just took off running. And it was probably the longest run of my life. I felt like I couldn't move fast enough because it's wide open. Rounds are hitting everywhere around me. I jumped into this trench. And when I did, I landed on Gunnery Sergeant Johnson.
And he was?
He was dead.
They were all dead. First Lieutenant Michael Johnson, Sergeant Edwin Johnson, Sergeant Aaron Kenefick, and Corpsman James Doc Layton. It was now 6 hours into the battle that would also take the lives of 8 Afghan soldiers.
If we had gotten supporting aviation on station early in the fight, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. That's my firm belief.
Would those Americans be alive today?
Yeah, you can't say with any certainty, but the chances are, in my opinion, yes, they would have been.
So you've just spent the last 6 hours risking, which is not the right word, your life, throwing away your life to try to get to those guys.
Yeah.
And they're dead.
You feel nothing but like being a failure,
That you couldn't get to them in time.
Yeah.
You realize that what you did was extraordinary?
No, I don't. It would have been extraordinary if I'd have brought them out alive. That would have been extraordinary.
Susan Price and Charlene Westbrook were not at the White House on Thursday to see the president award Dakota Meyer the Medal of Honor. Will Swenson, who quit the Army, was. He, too, was recommended for the Medal of Honor. But as if there weren't enough negligence to tarnish this battle, the paperwork got lost and had to be started all over again. As for Ganjgal, it still belongs to the Taliban.
The following is John Glenn's ending rebuttal statement delivered during a debate with Howard Metzenbaum that took place at the Cleveland City Club on May 4, 1974. At the time of the debate, Glenn and Metzenbaum were running against each other in the Ohio Democratic primary for U.S. Senator. In a speech given a few weeks prior to the debate, Metzenbaum stated that Glenn had never held a real job. Following the election, John Glenn won the primary election and went on to win the general election in November. In 1975, John Glenn started his first of 4 terms, 1975 through 1999, in the U.S. Senate.
In 1974, Glenn makes his 3rd attempt at the Ohio primary and is once again confronted by Howard Metzenbaum.
Well, the race was close, and Howard Metzenbaum, mindful of the fact that Democratic primary voters had turned anti-war against the war in Vietnam, took to calling John Glenn Colonel Glenn. Companion to that, Metzenbaum used the phrase that John Glenn had never met a payroll. And Howard Metzenbaum was a self-made millionaire, businessman, and John Glenn waited until that magic moment in the City Club debate. As I recall it, he just turned on Howard Metzenbaum and said,
I spent 23 years in the United States Marine Corps. I was through 2 wars. I flew 149 missions. I was in the space program. It wasn't my checkbook, it was my life that was on the line. You go with me as I went the other day out to a veterans hospital. Look those men out there with their mangled bodies in the eye and tell them they didn't hold a job. You go with me to any Gold Star mother and you look her in the eye and you tell her that her son did not hold a job. You go to Arlington National Cemetery, where I have more friends than I like to remember, and you think about this nation, and you tell me that those people didn't have a job. I tell you, Howard Metzenbaum, you should be on your knees every day of your life, thanking God that there were some men who held a job. And they required a dedication to purpose and a love of country and a dedication to duty that was more important than life itself. And their self-sacrifice is what has made this nation possible. I've held a job, Howard.
It was an incredible moment, and 22 seconds of uninterrupted applause. I mean, which is a lifetime at a political event. 3 days later, John Glenn beat him by 91,000 votes in the primary.
And goes on to win the general election and starts the first of what becomes 4 terms.
I'd like to close with the last stanza or verse from Johnny Prill's song, I Saw America Today. I saw America today. I saw our veterans honored for the vital role they play and for giving us the freedom so we can all proudly say, I saw America today. On your way home today, whether you're driving, riding, or walking, turn off the music, stop talking, and take a few minutes to look around and think of all the things that you can do instead of all the things you're not allowed to do. We have so many freedoms that we are not even aware of. Try. No, don't just try. Succeed in recognizing some of these freedoms that you have, and thank a veteran. Thank you for time, and thank you for listening.